On a warm summer day in 1961, Diana Frances Spencer was born into aristocracy at Park House, a grand 9-bedroom mansion nestled within Queen Elizabeth's Sandringham estate. The irony was not lost that this baby girl, born to parents hoping desperately for a male heir to continue the Spencer line, would one day become the most famous woman in the world and forever change the British monarchy. The Spencer family had been closely intertwined with British royalty for generations. Diana's father, Edward John Spencer, served as an equerry to both King George VI and Queen Elizabeth II. Her grandmother, Lady Fermoy, was a lady-in-waiting to the Queen Mother. This aristocratic bloodline ran deep through centuries, with the Spencers receiving their first title in 1603 and their earldom in 1765. They had made their fortune as wool traders during the Tudor era, gradually ascending the social ladder to become one of England's most prominent noble families. But Diana's childhood at Park House was far from the fairy tale many would later imagine. Her parents' marriage was troubled from the start, strained by the pressure to produce a male heir after the tragic death of their infant son John, who died just a year before Diana was born. The young Diana grew up alongside her two older sisters, Sarah and Jane, and her younger brother Charles, but the family atmosphere was tense and unstable. The children's early years were spent in the shadow of tragedy and disappointment. Lady Althorpe was subjected to humiliating medical examinations at Harley Street clinics as doctors tried to determine why she couldn't produce the desired male heir. This experience, later described as dreadful by Diana's brother Charles, planted the seeds of resentment and unhappiness that would eventually tear the family apart. When Diana was just 6 years old, her world shattered completely. Her mother, Frances, fell in love with Peter Shand Kidd, an Australian wallpaper heir, and abruptly left the family home. The custody battle that followed was brutal and public, with Frances's own mother, Ruth Fermoy, testifying against her in court. Earl Spencer was awarded custody of all 4 children, and they remained at Park House while their mother started a new life in Scotland. Diana's brother Charles would later describe their childhood as deeply unhappy, explaining that their mother wasn't cut out for maternity and was infatuated with her new love. The children rarely saw their mother after the divorce, and when Earl Spencer remarried in 1976 to Rayne, Countess of Dartmouth, the situation only worsened. Diana and her siblings despised their stepmother, whom they cruelly nicknamed Acid Rain. On one memorable occasion, Diana's frustration boiled over, and she pushed her stepmother down the stairs. Despite the turmoil at home, Diana's aristocratic upbringing continued with all the expected traditions. She was baptized at St. Mary Magdalene Church in Sandringham and spent her early years playing with the royal children, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward, who were close to her age. The Spencer children had access to the royal family's private world in a way few others did, attending family gatherings and becoming familiar with royal protocols from an early age. Education was not Diana's strong suit, though this was partly by design of the aristocratic system that didn't expect young ladies to pursue serious academic careers. At age 9, she was sent to Riddlesworth Hall, an all-girls boarding school in Norfolk, where she spent 3 years before transferring to West Heath School in Kent. Diana struggled academically, failing her O-level examinations twice and showing little aptitude for traditional subjects. However, Diana excelled in other areas that would prove far more valuable in her future role. She was an accomplished swimmer and diver, and she possessed a natural grace and elegance that made her stand out. More importantly, she demonstrated an innate ability to connect with people, showing genuine warmth and empathy that drew others to her. These qualities would later become her greatest assets as a member of the royal family. When Diana was 14, her life changed dramatically once again. Her grandfather, the 7th Earl Spencer, died, making her father the 8th Earl Spencer and heir to the family's ancestral home, Althorpe. This magnificent estate, with its 13,000 acres and 90-room mansion, had been in the Spencer family for over 500 years. The move to Althorpe marked Diana's transition from the Honorable Diana Spencer to Lady Diana Spencer, elevating her status within the British aristocracy. At 16, Diana made the decision to leave school entirely, much to the dismay of her teachers who saw potential in her despite her academic struggles. Her parents sent her to a finishing school in Switzerland, hoping to polish her social skills and improve her French. But Diana lasted only 6 weeks. She found the pretentious atmosphere stifling and preferred to spend her time skiing rather than learning proper etiquette and languages. Returning to England, Diana faced the question of what to do with her life. Without formal qualifications and coming from a background where careers for women were often seen as unnecessary, she moved to London at 18 with a generous inheritance and a flat provided by her parents as a coming-of-age gift. She shared this Coleherne Court apartment with 3 friends and began what would be her first taste of independence. Diana's early jobs revealed her natural affinity for working with children and those in need. She worked as an assistant at the Young England Kindergarten in Pimlico and took on babysitting jobs for wealthy London families. Her employers consistently praised her warmth, reliability, and genuine care for the children in her charge. She also briefly worked as a dance instructor, drawing on her childhood love of ballet, though she ultimately recognized that she lacked the technical skill for a professional dancing career. It was during this period of relative freedom that Diana's path first crossed with Prince Charles in a meaningful way. Though they had met briefly in 1977 at a shooting party at Althorpe when Charles was dating her sister Sarah, their romantic connection didn't begin until 1980. By then, Charles was under increasing pressure to find a suitable bride as he approached his 32nd birthday and faced mounting public scrutiny about his bachelor status. Sarah Spencer, who had briefly dated the prince, later claimed credit for introducing the couple, famously declaring that she played Cupid for her younger sister. The irony was that Sarah had ended her own relationship with Charles by speaking too freely to the press, something Diana would later learn to navigate much more skillfully. Their courtship was conducted largely in secret, with Diana carefully managed by both her own family and the royal establishment. She underwent intensive training in royal protocol, learning everything from how to curtsy properly to how to handle media attention. The Spencer family's long association with the royals meant that Diana already understood much about royal life, but nothing could fully prepare her for the reality of becoming the most photographed woman in the world. When their engagement was announced on February 24, 1981, Diana was still just 19 years old, while Charles was 32. The age gap raised some eyebrows, but the public was immediately charmed by the shy young woman who blushed during press conferences and seemed genuinely overwhelmed by the attention. Her famous engagement interview, where she said there were 3 of us in this marriage, referring to Charles's continuing relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, wouldn't come until much later. At this point, Diana appeared to be the perfect fairy tale princess. The engagement period was a whirlwind of preparation and public appearances. Diana moved into Clarence House and then Buckingham Palace, where she received intensive coaching on royal duties, public speaking, and media management. She was assigned a team of advisors who worked to transform the shy kindergarten teacher into a polished royal consort. The transformation was remarkable, but it came at a personal cost as Diana struggled with the loss of privacy and the enormous pressure of her new role. The British public embraced Diana immediately, seeing in her a breath of fresh air for a monarchy that had sometimes seemed out of touch with ordinary people. Her youth, beauty, and apparent vulnerability struck a chord with millions who felt that she represented a new kind of royal, one who understood their daily struggles and concerns. As the wedding day approached, Diana privately battled doubts about her future husband's commitment to their relationship. She had discovered the depth of Charles's ongoing relationship with Camilla. But by then, the royal machinery was in full motion, and backing out seemed impossible. The young woman who had grown up in the shadow of her parents' failed marriage was about to embark on her own troubled union, though she couldn't have fully understood the challenges that lay ahead. The stage was set for one of the most watched weddings in history, an event that would transform both Diana and the British monarchy forever. What appeared to be a fairy tale romance was actually the beginning of a complex and ultimately tragic story that would play out on the world stage for the next 16 years. Diana Spencer, the aristocratic young woman who had failed her exams and worked as a nanny, was about to become the people's princess, a role that would define not only her own life, but also the future of the British royal family. The morning of July 29, 1981, dawned bright and clear, perfect for what would be called the wedding of the century. As 20-year-old Lady Diana Spencer stepped out of the glass coach at St. Paul's Cathedral, her 25-foot train flowing behind her like liquid silk, an estimated 750 million people around the world watched history in the making. The shy kindergarten teacher was about to become the Princess of Wales, and neither she nor the watching world could have imagined how profoundly this moment would reshape the British monarchy. Diana's wedding dress, designed by David and Elizabeth Emanuel, became instantly iconic with its dramatic silhouette, puffy sleeves, and seemingly endless train. The Spencer family tiara held her silk taffeta veil in place, while her bouquet combined traditional flowers with personal touches that hinted at the woman she would become. 600,000 people lined the streets of London, cheering as the couple made their way to Buckingham Palace for the famous balcony kiss that sealed their union in the public imagination. But even in that moment of triumph, careful observers might have noticed troubling signs. During the ceremony, Diana accidentally called her husband Philip Charles Arthur George instead of Charles Philip Arthur George, mixing up his first two names. More tellingly, when asked if she would promise to obey her husband, both she and Charles had agreed beforehand to remove this traditional vow from their ceremony, a small but significant departure from royal tradition that hinted at Diana's modern sensibilities. The honeymoon period, both literal and metaphorical, was brief. After a few days at Broadlands, the Mountbatten family estate, the newlyweds embarked on a Mediterranean cruise aboard the royal yacht Britannia. However, what should have been a romantic getaway became the first clear indication of the fundamental incompatibility between the couple. Charles brought books on philosophy and spent hours reading alone, while Diana, barely out of her teens, hoped for romance and companionship. Their different interests and 17-year age gap became glaringly apparent when they had little to distract them except each other's company. Diana's first pregnancy was announced just 4 months after the wedding, bringing joy to a nation eager to see the continuation of the royal line. However, the pregnancy also marked the beginning of Diana's struggle with the intense media scrutiny that would define her entire adult life. She was photographed constantly, with every outfit, every expression, and every public appearance dissected by the press and public alike. Prince William's birth on June 21, 1982, was a moment of genuine happiness for both Diana and the British people. Diana broke with royal tradition by giving birth in a hospital rather than at the palace, and she insisted on taking an active role in raising her son rather than leaving his care entirely to nannies. When William was just 9 months old, Diana made the groundbreaking decision to take him on a royal tour of Australia and New Zealand, marking the first time a royal baby had accompanied his parents on an official overseas visit. The Australian tour in 1983 proved to be a turning point in Diana's royal career and her marriage. The crowds that gathered to see the royal couple were clearly more interested in Diana than in Charles, chanting her name and expressing disappointment when Charles appeared without her. Diana's natural warmth and ability to connect with people of all backgrounds shone during walkabouts, where she would kneel down to speak with children, comfort the elderly, and show genuine interest in everyone she met. For Charles, who had expected to be the center of attention as the future king, Diana's popularity was both surprising and unsettling. Newspaper headlines proclaimed Di-Mania and Diana the Dazzler, while Charles was often reduced to making self-deprecating jokes about being overshadowed by his wife. This dynamic would persist throughout their marriage, with Diana's natural charisma and media appeal consistently outshining Charles's more formal approach to royal duties. The birth of Prince Harry in 1984 completed what appeared to be the perfect royal family. But behind the public facade, Diana was struggling with serious personal challenges. She had developed bulimia, an eating disorder that she later revealed began as a response to the pressure of royal life and her husband's emotional unavailability. The condition remained secret for years, but it profoundly affected her health and well-being during what should have been some of the happiest years of her life. Diana's approach to royal duties was revolutionary in ways both subtle and obvious. Where previous royal women had maintained a careful distance from controversial issues, Diana chose to champion causes that the establishment often preferred to ignore. Her decision to shake hands with AIDS patients without gloves in 1987 made headlines around the world and helped dispel dangerous myths about how the disease was transmitted. This simple gesture demonstrated Diana's instinctive understanding of the power of royal symbolism and her willingness to use that power for social good. Her work with homeless charities saw her making unannounced visits to shelters, sitting on beds to talk with residents, and bringing her sons to see how less fortunate people lived. Diana believed that exposure to real-world problems would make William and Harry better future leaders, a philosophy that marked a significant departure from traditional royal child-rearing practices. The landmines campaign, that would become one of Diana's most famous causes, began in the early 1990s when she learned about the ongoing devastation caused by unexploded devices in former war zones. Her visit to Angola in 1997, where she walked through an active minefield wearing protective gear, created some of the most powerful images of her career and brought international attention to the issue. Critics accused her of political interference, but Diana maintained that landmines were a humanitarian issue that transcended politics. As Diana grew more confident in her royal role, the cracks in her marriage became increasingly difficult to hide. Charles had never fully ended his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, and Diana was painfully aware that she was competing with a woman who had known her husband far longer and understood him in ways she never would. The famous quote about there being 3 people in her marriage would later crystallize the public's understanding of the impossible position Diana found herself in. The media, which had initially treated Diana with kid gloves, gradually became more invasive and critical. Every aspect of her life was scrutinized, from her fashion choices to her relationships with friends and staff. Diana learned to navigate this attention with increasing sophistication, understanding that the press could be both ally and enemy, depending on how skillfully she managed her image. Her style evolution during this period reflected her growing confidence and independence. The shy young woman in ruffled dresses gradually gave way to a sophisticated fashion icon who understood the power of clothing to communicate messages. Her choice to wear a striking black off-the-shoulder dress to her first public appearance after Charles admitted his affair sent a clear signal that she would not be cowed by public humiliation. Diana's work with children remained a constant throughout her royal career, from her early visits to hospitals to her patronage of numerous children's charities. She had a unique ability to communicate with young people, treating them with respect and genuine interest rather than the patronizing tone often adopted by adults in similar positions. Her sons later credited her with teaching them to see beyond titles and status to the person underneath. The transformation of Diana from shy aristocrat to confident public figure was remarkable to witness. She developed her own distinctive approach to royal duties, one that emphasized emotional connection over protocol. Where traditional royal engagements often felt formal and distant, Diana's interactions appeared natural and spontaneous, even when they were carefully planned and choreographed. Her growing independence began to concern the royal establishment, who worried that Diana was overshadowing not just her husband, but the institution of monarchy itself. Her popularity with the public gave her a platform and influence that she increasingly used to advance her own agenda rather than simply supporting the crown's traditional role. By the early 1990s, it was clear that Diana had evolved far beyond the role originally envisioned for her. She was no longer content to be simply a decorative royal wife who produced heirs and attended charity galas. Instead, she had become a powerful voice for social change, using her platform to highlight issues that might otherwise be ignored by mainstream media and politics. The woman who had once been so nervous during public appearances that she blushed and stammered had become one of the most effective communicators of her generation. Her ability to convey compassion and understanding through a simple touch or glance made her beloved by millions who felt that she truly understood their struggles and cared about their welfare. This evolution from traditional royal consort to independent humanitarian would ultimately lead to her separation from Charles and her emergence as a global figure in her own right. But it would also set the stage for the conflicts and controversies that would define the final years of her life, as she struggled to balance her royal obligations with her desire for personal freedom and authentic self-expression. The 1990s began with what appeared to be a stable royal marriage, but behind the carefully maintained public facade, Diana and Charles were living increasingly separate lives. The fantasy of the fairy tale romance had crumbled under the weight of incompatibility, infidelity, and the relentless pressure of public scrutiny. Diana's transformation from a shy young bride into a confident humanitarian had been remarkable, but it had also created an independent woman who could no longer tolerate the constraints of a loveless marriage within the rigid confines of royal tradition. The first public crack in the royal marriage appeared in June 1992, with the publication of Andrew Morton's explosive book, Diana, Her True Story. Based on secret tape recordings Diana had made for Morton, the book revealed intimate details about her bulimia, her suicide attempts, and Charles's ongoing relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles. The revelations shocked the British public, who had believed in the fairy tale image carefully cultivated by the palace's public relations machine. Diana's participation in Morton's book represented a calculated risk that demonstrated her growing political sophistication. She understood that by telling her story first, she could control the narrative and position herself as the victim rather than the villain in the marriage's breakdown. The public response was overwhelmingly sympathetic, with many people identifying with Diana's struggles against an establishment that seemed cold and uncaring. The Queen, recognizing the severity of the crisis, took the unprecedented step of calling 1992 her annus horribilis, horrible year. The Morton revelations were followed by the publication of embarrassing, intimate phone conversations between Charles and Camilla, and between Diana and James Gilby, her alleged lover. These Camilla-gate and Squidgy-gate tapes, as the media dubbed them, provided the public with uncomfortable glimpses into the private lives of the royal family. In December 1992, Prime Minister John Major announced the formal separation of the Prince and Princess of Wales in the House of Commons. The statement emphasized that there were no constitutional implications and that both parents would continue to participate fully in the upbringing of their children. However, everyone understood that this marked the end of one of the most watched marriages in history. The period following the separation saw Diana emerge as an independent force in British public life. No longer constrained by the need to support her husband's initiatives, she threw herself into causes that mattered deeply to her. Her work with AIDS patients intensified, and she became a patron of several organizations working with homeless people, disabled children, and victims of domestic violence. Each cause reflected her genuine desire to help society's most vulnerable members. Diana's famous television interview with Martin Bashir in November 1995 marked a watershed moment in her relationship with the royal family. Watched by 23 million people in Britain alone, the interview saw Diana speak candidly about her marriage, her struggles with mental health, and her desire to be a queen of people's hearts. Her admission that "there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded," became one of the most quoted lines in royal history. The interview's most significant revelation was Diana's acknowledgement of her own affair with James Hewitt, her former riding instructor. This admission balanced the narrative somewhat, showing that both partners had been unfaithful, but Diana's emotional honesty and vulnerability during the interview maintained public sympathy for her position. Her statement that she didn't expect to become queen demonstrated her understanding that her path forward lay outside traditional royal roles. The queen's response was swift and decisive. Within weeks of the Bashir interview, she wrote to both Charles and Diana advising them to proceed with a swift divorce. The negotiations were complex, involving not just financial settlements, but also Diana's future role and her relationship with her sons. The final decree absolute was granted on August 28, 1996, officially ending the marriage that had begun with such hope 15 years earlier. The divorce settlement reflected Diana's unique position as the mother of the future king. She retained her apartments at Kensington Palace, received a substantial financial settlement, and kept most of her jewelry. More importantly, she maintained equal responsibility for William and Harry's upbringing and continued to be regarded as a member of the royal family, albeit without the style, Her Royal Highness. Diana's final year was marked by both personal happiness and professional achievement. Her relationship with Hasnat Khan, a Pakistani heart surgeon, provided her with the emotional support she had long craved, though their cultural differences and Khan's reluctance to live in the public eye ultimately doomed the romance. Her subsequent relationship with Dodi Al-Fayed was more public, but appeared to offer the possibility of a new start. Professionally, Diana's landmines campaign reached its peak in 1997. Her visit to Angola in January, followed by trips to Bosnia and other conflict zones, brought unprecedented international attention to the issue of unexploded ordnance. The sight of Diana walking through minefields wearing protective gear created some of the most powerful images of her career, and demonstrated her commitment to using her celebrity status for humanitarian purposes. The campaign faced criticism from some quarters, with politicians and military figures arguing that Diana was interfering in complex international issues. However, her response was typically direct. She insisted that landmines were a humanitarian rather than political issue, and that her role was to highlight the human cost of these weapons. The eventual signing of the Ottawa Treaty banning anti-personnel mines was widely attributed, at least in part, to Diana's advocacy. On the night of August 30, 1997, Diana's life was cut tragically short in a car crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris. She was fleeing from paparazzi with Dodi Al-Fayed when their Mercedes, driven by Henri Paul, crashed at high speed. Dodi and Henri Paul were killed instantly, while Diana died from her injuries in the early hours of August 31st. Only bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones survived the crash. The immediate aftermath of Diana's death revealed the profound connection she had forged with the British public. Millions of people flocked to Kensington Palace, creating an unprecedented display of public mourning with flowers, messages, and makeshift memorials. The queue of people waiting to sign condolence books stretched for miles, and the silence in normally bustling London was eerily profound. The royal family's initial response was criticized as being too restrained and traditional. The Queen's decision to remain at Balmoral with her grandsons, rather than immediately returning to London, was seen by many as out of touch with the public mood. However, the extraordinary outpouring of grief eventually forced the monarchy to acknowledge that Diana's death represented a fundamental shift in the relationship between the royal family and the British people. Diana's funeral on September 6, 1997, was watched by an estimated 2.5 billion people worldwide, making it one of the most viewed events in television history. The service at Westminster Abbey struck a balance between royal tradition and Diana's own style, featuring both classical music and Elton John's specially revised Candle in the Wind. The image of William and Harry, then 15 and 12 respectively, walking behind their mother's coffin, became one of the most heartbreaking images of the modern era. Earl Spencer's funeral address was a masterpiece of controlled emotion and barely concealed criticism of the royal family's treatment of his sister. His promise that the Spencer family would ensure that William and Harry's souls were not simply immersed by duty and tradition, but can sing openly as you planned, was widely interpreted as a rebuke to royal constraints on personal expression. The investigation into Diana's death continued for years, with various conspiracy theories emerging about possible assassination plots. However, extensive investigations by both French authorities and a British inquest concluded that the crash was a tragic accident caused by Henri Paul's intoxication, excessive speed, and the pursuit by paparazzi photographers. Diana's legacy extends far beyond the circumstances of her death. Her approach to royal duties, emphasizing emotional connection and humanitarian work, permanently changed public expectations of the monarchy. Her sons, William and Harry, have explicitly credited their mother with teaching them to connect with people from all backgrounds and to use their privileged positions for social good. The Diana Award, established in her memory, continues her work with young people, while numerous hospitals, charities, and public spaces bear her name. Her influence can be seen in the more relaxed, emotionally open approach adopted by younger members of the royal family, particularly in their willingness to discuss mental health issues and their hands-on approach to charitable work. Perhaps most significantly, Diana's legacy lives on through her sons' choices about how to live their lives and raise their own children. Prince William's marriage to Kate Middleton, a commoner, would have been unthinkable without Diana's example of bringing fresh perspectives into the royal family. Prince Harry's decision to step back from royal duties to pursue a more independent life in America directly echoes his mother's struggle to balance personal fulfillment with institutional obligations. The charitable work initiated by Diana continues through the Royal Foundation, established by William and Harry to carry forward their mother's humanitarian mission. Her influence can be seen in their choice of causes, from mental health advocacy to environmental protection and support for veterans and their families. Both princes frequently speak about their mother's continuing influence on their lives and their determination to continue her work. Diana's impact on popular culture remains profound more than 25 years after her death. Books, documentaries, films, and television series continue to explore her life and legacy, each generation discovering her story anew. The enduring fascination with Diana reflects not just curiosity about royal life, but recognition that she represented a kind of authenticity and emotional honesty that resonates across cultural boundaries. The transformation of the British monarchy since Diana's death owes much to her influence. The institution that once seemed remote and unapproachable has become more accessible and emotionally engaged with the public's concerns. This evolution was not inevitable, but required the example Diana provided of how royal status could be used to create genuine human connections and advocate for positive social change. Today, as her granddaughter Princess Charlotte grows up and her sons continue their own royal duties, Diana's vision of a more compassionate and accessible monarchy continues to evolve. Her belief that the royal family should serve as a beacon of hope for those who most need support remains a guiding principle for how her descendants approach their public roles. The girl who once failed her exams and worked as a kindergarten assistant ultimately achieved something far more significant than academic success. She showed how individual authenticity and compassion could transform even the most traditional institutions. In death, as in life, Princess Diana remains the people's princess, a title that captures both her unique connection with ordinary people and her enduring influence on how we think about leadership, service, and the possibility of using privilege to create positive change in the world.